The Laxus stood before 300 students in the grand lecture hall. Her scales gleamed under the soft lights as she moved across the stage. She was the best teacher at the Academy of Lost Civilizations, and today she would prove something important. Humans never existed, she said clearly. Her voice echoed in the quiet room. A young student raised his hand. "But Professor, the stories come from so many different worlds. How can they all be wrong?" The Laxus smiled. She had waited for this question. She pressed a button and images filled the air above the students. Ancient texts appeared, each one describing the mythical humans differently. "Look closely," she said. "The Varanthi tales say humans had skin like stone and could breathe fire. The Kesal legends claim humans were made of pure light. The Drevni stories describe them as shapeshifters who lived for thousands of years. They cannot all be true." She walked between the floating images. "But they do share some common elements. All the stories say humans came from a planet called Terra. They say humans were persistence hunters who never gave up. They say humans could bond with any species, even their enemies. And most importantly, all the stories say humans fought in something called the Silence War, then vanished without a trace." Another student spoke up. "What if the different descriptions are just mistakes in translation over time?" "An excellent question," Valaxis replied. She brought up more data. "I spent 10 years searching for any physical evidence of humans. I looked for ruins, for graves, for genetic markers, for anything real. I found nothing. Not one bone. Not one broken tool. Not one piece of their supposed technology." She paused to let this sink in. The Galactic Concordance has records going back 12,000 years. In all that time, in all that space, covering 847 different species, there is not one single piece of hard evidence that humans ever existed. The students murmured among themselves. The Laxus knew she had them convinced. "Humans are a myth," she continued. "A shared story that many species tell themselves. Perhaps humans represent what we wish we could be. Brave, unstoppable, capable of both great kindness and great violence. Or perhaps humans are a warning tale, meant to remind us to stay humble." She brought up her final slide. "Today, I am publishing my complete research in the Journal of Xenanthropology. The mystery of humanity is solved. They were never real." The students applauded. The Laxus felt satisfied. She had done good work. She had used science and logic to defeat superstition. That night, she celebrated with her colleagues at a restaurant overlooking the city. The lights of 1,000 different species' homes glowed in the darkness. The Concordance had brought peace to all of them. The Laxus felt proud to be part of such a civilization. Her communication device buzzed. It was her friend Silmar, an artificial intelligence who worked in the archaeology department. "The Laxus, turn on the news," Silmar said. His usually calm voice sounded strange. She activated the holographic display above their table. The news anchor, a girl with bright purple skin, looked shaken. "We have breaking news from Hesperus the Seventh," the anchor said. "The mining colony has gone dark. Security footage was transmitted before communications were lost. Warning, the following images are disturbing." The screen changed. The Laxus saw the mining colony from above. Everything looked normal at first. Then shapes moved in from the edges of the frame. They were bipedal, moving on 2 legs like many species did. But something about the way they moved was different. They moved like predators, like hunters. The shapes wore armor that looked ancient and primitive, but they moved with perfect coordination. They surrounded the automated defense turrets and destroyed them one by one. The method was brutal and efficient. They didn't use advanced weapons. They used tactics and teamwork. One of the shapes moved close to a camera. The Laxus felt her blood go cold. The creature was exactly as the myths described. 2 arms, 2 legs, bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes like a predator, hair on its head, skin that looked soft and vulnerable, yet the creature moved like it feared nothing. The creature looked directly into the camera. Then it raised something and smashed the camera. The feed went dead. The news anchor returned. Concordance Security is investigating. No survivors have been found. The attackers left behind one message, carved into the colony's main computer. The message appeared on screen. It was written in Old Concordance script, the ancient language from before the Great Peace. You forgot. We remember. The Laxus stared at the words. Her colleagues around her were talking, panicking, asking questions. She heard none of it. Her mind was racing. The creatures in the footage matched the human descriptions. The armor looked like it came from before the Concordance. The message was in a dead language. And the way they moved, the way they fought, it matched the old stories about human pack tactics, but it was impossible. She had proven humans didn't exist. Hadn't she? Her device buzzed again. This time, it was an official summons. The Concordance Security Council wanted to see her immediately. They wanted to know everything she knew about human mythology. As Valaxis flew toward the council building in an automated transport, she looked out at the peaceful city below. 12,000 years of peace. 847 species living together. All of it based on the idea that the Concordance had brought order to chaos, civilization to the wild frontier of space. But what if the Concordance's history was wrong? What if humans had been real? And if they were real, where had they gone for 12,000 years? More importantly, why were they back now? The transport landed on the council building's platform. Valaxis stepped out into the cold night air. Security officers were waiting for her, their faces grim. Professor Valaxis, one of them said, "There's been another attack. And another. They're happening all over the Outer Rim. How many?" She asked. 7 colonies in the last hour. All the same pattern. All the same message. The officer looked scared. Valaxis had never seen a Concordance security officer look scared before. "Professor," the officer said quietly, "what are they? What do they want?" Valaxis thought about all her research, all her papers, all her lectures proving humans were just myths. She thought about the creature looking into the camera with those forward-facing predator eyes. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm going to find out." As she walked into the council building, Valaxis realized that everything she thought she knew about the galaxy's history might be wrong. And if she was wrong about humans, what else had she been wrong about? The myths were supposed to stay myths. They weren't supposed to start killing people. The council chamber was full of frightened officials. Valaxis had never seen the Concordance leadership look so uncertain. They sat in their floating chairs, representatives from dozens of species, all watching the screens that showed attack after attack. Commander Dex stood at attention near the main display. He was Voranthi, a warrior species that served as the Concordance's military backbone. His forearms were crossed, and his red eyes focused on the footage playing over and over. 17 attacks in 3 days, Dex said in his deep voice. 42 colonies hit. Thousands dead. We've mobilized the fleet, but these attackers disappear before we arrive. They know our response times. They know our patrol routes. One of the council members, an elderly Kresh named Counselor Ven, spoke up. "Commander, you're saying they have inside information?" "I'm saying they fight like they wrote our tactical manual," Dex replied. "Every defense we have, they counter it. Every trap we set, they avoid it. It's like fighting ghosts who know our every move." "Because they're older than us," Valaxis said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood and approached the main display. "May I?" Dex nodded. Valaxis pulled up a map of the attacks. Red dots marked each location. "I've been studying the pattern," she said. "At first, the attacks seemed random, but they're not. Look at the coordinates." She highlighted each attack location. Then she pulled up something else, an old star chart from the Concordance's earliest archives. This is a map from 12,000 years ago, before the Concordance standardized our navigation systems. Notice anything? Dr. Silmar, who had been invited to join them, made a sound of surprise. His holographic form flickered with excitement. The attacks line up with locations that aren't on modern charts. Locations that were removed. Removed? Counselor Venn asked. "Why would we remove planets from our charts?" Valaxis and Silmar exchanged glances. "We don't know yet," Valaxis said carefully. "But I have a theory. These attackers aren't just raiding colonies. They're excavating something. They're digging at each site before they leave." Dex pulled up footage from one of the attacks. The bipedal creatures in ancient armor were indeed digging at specific locations. They used tools that looked primitive but effective. They worked with the coordination of a hive mind. A Valaxis could see it was something different. It was training, practice, the kind of teamwork that came from fighting together for a very long time. "What are they looking for?" Dex asked. "I think they already know what's there," Valaxis said. "I think they're taking it back." Over the next week, Valaxis worked around the clock with Dex and Silmar. They became an unlikely team. The soldier, the scholar, and the artificial mind. They reviewed every second of footage, every piece of data, every scrap of information about the attacks. Silmar made breakthrough after breakthrough. He dug through ancient archives, finding records that have been buried under layers of bureaucratic data. What he found was disturbing. There were 12 additional habitable planets in the locations being attacked, Silmar reported. 12 worlds that existed before the Concordance was formed. They had populations, cities, civilizations, and then 12,000 years ago, they vanished from all records. Vanished how? Dex demanded. "Planets don't just disappear. The planets are still there," Silmar explained. "But they're dead now. Lifeless rocks. According to geological surveys, they died approximately 12,000 years ago. Massive bombardment. Nuclear fire. Complete extinction events." Valaxis felt sick. Someone destroyed 12 worlds? And then erased them from history, Silmar added. "I found fragments of deleted files. References to something called the Obliteration Protocol. But the actual records are gone. Permanently deleted from every archive I can access." Dex was pacing now, all 4 of his arms gesturing as he thought. So 12 worlds were destroyed at the founding of the Concordance. The attackers are excavating those worlds. And they match the descriptions of mythical humans. He stopped and looked at Valaxis. "You don't think? I don't know what to think anymore," Valaxis interrupted. "Everything I believed was wrong." That night, Valaxis couldn't sleep. She kept watching the footage of the attackers. She studied their movements, their weapons, their tactics. She noticed something Dex had missed. The attackers were careful about casualties. They destroyed defenses, but when given a choice, they avoided killing Concordant civilians. They were surgical in their violence. These weren't mindless raiders. They were disciplined, professional, and they were angry. Valaxis decided to try something risky. She set up a communication intercept at one of the predicted attack sites. If the attackers were as smart as she thought, they might try to communicate with each other. She hid the listening device in a place they would search. 3 days later, the attack came just as she predicted. The attackers swept through the colony's defenses in minutes. Valaxis watched from orbit as they began their excavation. And then, her device intercepted a transmission. The signal was encrypted, but Silmar broke the code quickly. What appeared on screen made Valaxis's hearts stop. It was a human face. Female, with dark skin and gray hair pulled back in a tight style. Her face was weathered, like she had lived a hard life. But her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She wore a uniform that looked military, but like nothing in the Concordance's records. She was speaking in Proto-Concordance, the dead language from 12,000 years ago. Site 7 is secure, the woman said to someone off-screen. We found the memorial. They bury it under their mining equipment. Like our dead meant nothing to them. Her voice was cold with controlled rage. Another voice responded, male and younger. Captain Chun, the fleet is asking if we should leave the message. Captain Chun looked directly at the camera, almost as if she knew Valaxis was watching. Yes, leave the message. They need to understand what they did, what they took from us. The transmission changed angles. Valaxis saw the excavation site now. The humans had uncovered something. It was a monument, weathered by time but still recognizable. It showed figures carved in stone, families, children, names by the thousands. This was New Beijing, Captain Chen said quietly. 2 billion souls. They had no weapons, no defenses. They were farmers, artists, teachers. And the Concordance burned them from orbit for the crime of refusing to submit. She touched the monument gently. We remember them all. Every name. Every face. We passed their stories down for 12,000 years. We lived in the dark between stars, in ships older than some of your species' entire civilizations, and we remembered. Captain Chun looked back at the camera. You built your paradise on our graves. You erased us from history so you could forget what you did. But we don't forget. We never forget. The transmission ended. Valaxis played it again. And again. She studied Captain Chen's face, looking for signs of deception or madness. She found neither. Only grief. Only rage. Only truth. Dex arrived at her workspace an hour later. She showed him the transmission without a word. When it finished, the warrior was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. I've been a soldier for 40 years. I've fought in a dozen conflicts. But I've always believed the Concordance was just that we represented peace and order. And now? Valaxis asked. Now I think we need to know what really happened 12,000 years ago. Dex's red eyes glowed with determination. The Grand Archive has a sub-level 0. It's classified beyond anything I've ever seen. The kind of classification that makes you wonder what they're hiding. Can you get us in? Silmar asked. Dex smiled grimly. I'm a commander in Concordance security. I can get us anywhere once. After that, we'll probably be arrested for treason. Valaxis looked at the frozen image of Captain Chen on her screen. A human, a real human. Not a myth, not a legend. A survivor of something terrible. Then let's make that one time count. Valaxis said they had 3 days to plan. 3 days before the council would move the archive's contents to a more secure location. 3 days to learn the truth about what they, Concordance, had done. 3 days to understand why the myths had come back to kill them. The Grand Archive stood at the center of the Concordance capital. It was a monument to transparency, or so everyone believed. Citizens from any species could walk through its halls and access 12,000 years of history. Every treaty, every law, every important decision was supposedly recorded there for all to see. But Valaxis had learned that not everything was meant to be seen. Dex led them through the archive late at night. His security clearance opened doors that most people didn't even know existed. They went down, level after level, past the public records, past the restricted files, past even the military secrets. Finally, they reached a door that had no label. No sign, no indication it existed at all. Sub-level 0. Dex said quietly. "According to the records I accessed, this level doesn't exist. Which means what's inside is something the Concordance wants permanently forgotten." He used his credentials. The door opened with a hiss of air that suggested it hadn't been opened in a very long time. Inside was a small room filled with data storage devices. Old ones, the kind that predated modern technology. Silmar immediately began interfacing with the systems, his holographic form flickering as he dove into the ancient files. "These aren't just old," Silmar said with wonder in his voice. "These are from the founding of the Concordance itself. Original records, unedited, unfiltered." Valaxis felt her hands shaking as she helped access the files. What they found was worse than anything she had imagined. The first file was a proposal dated 12,000 years ago. It was written by the founding species of the Concordance, the ones who still held most of the power in the Council. The proposal was titled The Integration Protocol. Valaxis read it aloud, her voice hollow. "All species in the galaxy will be offered membership in the Concordance. Those who accept will receive protection, technology, and prosperity. Those who refuse will be classified as threats to galactic peace." "That doesn't sound so bad," Dex said. But his voice suggested he knew what was coming. Galaxis continued reading. "Threats to galactic peace will be neutralized through the Obliteration Protocol. Complete destruction of all military assets, followed by occupation and forced integration. In extreme cases, where a species proves fundamentally incompatible with Concordance values, total extinction is authorized." The room fell silent. Silmar brought up more files. Battle plans, target lists, casualty reports, and finally, a file labeled The Human Problem. The file outlined the situation 12,000 years ago. Humanity had been a young spacefaring species, controlling only 12 worlds. They had formed something called the Terran Federation. When the Concordance had arrived and offered membership, the human government had refused. "They said no," Valaxis whispered. "They just said no." The file explained the Concordance's reasoning. Humans were seen as dangerous. They came from a high-gravity world with extreme weather and deadly predators. They had evolved as persistence hunters. They formed strong emotional bonds, not just with their own kind, but with other species. They had a concept called rights that they refused to compromise on. Most importantly, humans had a disturbing tendency to fight against impossible odds. They didn't surrender when logic said they should. They didn't accept defeat when it was obvious. The Concordance founders feared that if humanity was allowed to remain independent, they would inspire other species to resist. So the decision was made. The Obliteration Protocol was authorized. The next files were military reports. Valaxis read them with growing horror. The Concordance fleet had surrounded the 12 human worlds. They had demanded unconditional surrender. The humans had refused. What followed was systematic genocide. The reports were clinical in their detail. Each human world was bombarded from orbit. Nuclear weapons, kinetic strikes, atmospheric burners. Billions died in the first hours. The humans fought back with everything they had, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. It took 3 months to kill them all. 3 months to reduce 12 thriving worlds to radioactive wastelands, but not all the humans died on their worlds. Dex found a file marked Escaped. Assets. It listed human ships that had fled during the bombardment. Colony ships, science vessels, military cruisers. Hundreds of ships carrying millions of survivors had escaped into deep space. The Concordance had sent pursuit fleets, but the humans had disappeared into the void between stars. The Concordance had searched for decades, but eventually gave up. The survivors were written off as a minor problem that would die out on their own in the harsh emptiness of space. Then came the final phase. The cover-up.vel axis found detailed instructions for erasing humanity from history. The 12 dead worlds were to be removed from star charts. All records of the Terran Federation were to be deleted. Any species that had traded with or met humans were to have their memories adjusted through a combination of propaganda and strategic data corruption. The Concordance even seeded false information. They created the contradictory myths about humans, making them seem like obvious fiction. They made sure the stories spread far and wide, but always in a form that could be easily dismissed. It had worked perfectly. For 12,000 years, the greatest crime in galactic history had been forgotten, hidden, turned into a myth. They murdered billions, Dex said quietly. His voice shook with anger. They committed genocide because humanity wanted to be free, and then they built the Concordance on top of the graves. Silmar was processing the data faster than Valaxis could read it. There's more, he said. After the obliteration protocol, 6 other species refused to join the Concordance. All 6 were threatened with the same fate. All 6 submitted. The Concordance's peace was bought with the threat of extinction. Valaxis sat down heavily. Her entire life's work had been based on a lie. She had spent years proving humans were myths, never realizing she was helping maintain the cover-up. She had been a tool of the very genocide she now uncovered. The survivors, she said suddenly. The ones who escaped. They've been out there for 12,000 years. In the dark, remembering. Dex nodded grimly. And now they're back. Captain Chun and her fleet. They're not raiders. They're not terrorists. They're survivors of genocide, and they want justice. Can you blame them? Silmar asked quietly. Valaxis looked at the data surrounding them. 12 worlds. Billions of dead. An entire species erased from history. And the Concordance, her Concordance, had done it all, and then pretended to be heroes of peace. No, she said. I can't blame them at all. Alarm suddenly blared. Dex checked his communicator and cursed. Security knows we're here. We have maybe 5 minutes before they arrive. We need to copy all of this, Valaxis said urgently. Silmar worked fast, downloading everything he could into portable storage. Got it. The Valaxis, what do we do with this information? If we release it, the Concordance will collapse. 847 species held together by faith in a system built on lies. If we don't release it, Dex countered, the Council will use the same justification to commit another genocide. They're already talking about using extreme measures against the human fleet. Valaxis made her decision. We release it. All of it. The galaxy deserves to know the truth. And the humans deserve to have their story told. They fled the archive as security forces closed in. Dex used his knowledge of the building to get them out through maintenance tunnels. They made it to a safe location, a friend's apartment far from the government district. Valaxis sat down and began writing. She would tell the whole story. She would expose the genocide. She would prove that humans were not myths, but victims. And she would make sure the galaxy knew what the Concordance had really been founded on. As she wrote, she thought about Captain Chun, a woman who had been born in the dark between stars, descended from survivors who had watched their worlds burn. A woman who had probably never seen the planet her ancestors came from, but who carried their memory like a sacred duty. The humans had survived in impossible conditions for 12,000 years. They had lived in generation ships and hidden stations. They had kept their culture, their language, their identity alive in the void. They had refused to forget that, and now they were back, stronger and angrier than the Concordance had ever imagined possible. Valaxis finished her article and looked at Dex and Silmar. Once I release this, everything changes. The Concordance will fracture. There might be civil war. Species will question everything they've been taught. Good, Dex said firmly. A peace built on genocide deserves to be questioned. Valaxis nodded and hit send. The truth began spreading across the Concordance's networks, unstoppable as a wave. The myths were no longer myths, and the reckoning had only just begun. The galaxy was burning, not with fire, but with truth. Valaxis's article spread like wildfire through the Concordance networks. Within hours, every species knew. The genocide, the cover-up, the lies that had held their civilization together for 12,000 years. Riots broke out on 100 worlds. Governments fell. Species that had trusted the Concordance for millennia suddenly questioned everything. The Council tried to contain the damage. They claimed the files were fake. They said Valaxis was a traitor working with the human terrorists. But Silmar had released the raw data too, and experts across the galaxy verified it was real. The Council's denials only made things worse. Meanwhile, the human attacks intensified. Captain Chun's reclamation fleet was no longer hiding its strength. Hundreds of ships emerged from the dark spaces between stars. They were patchwork vessels, built and rebuilt over 12,000 years. Combining ancient human technology with innovations born from desperation, they hit military targets now, shipyards, communications hubs, supply depots. They fought with tactics the Concordance had never seen, tactics from before the Concordance existed. And they were winning. Commander Thex was called before the Council. He stood in the chamber where he had served loyally for 40 years, now facing accusations of treason. "You broke into the Grand Archive," Councillor Venn said coldly. "You stole classified information. You helped spread lies that are tearing our civilization apart." "They weren't lies," Thex said calmly. "They were truth. Truth that you wanted buried." The context was different 12,000 years ago, another councillor argued. The founders did what they thought was necessary for peace. They committed genocide, Thex said flatly. They murdered billions of innocent people, children, families, and then they erased it from history so no one would know. That's not peace. That's tyranny. Councillor Venn stood. "Commander Thex, you are hereby stripped of your rank and placed under arrest. However, given the current crisis, the Council is willing to offer you a chance at redemption." Thex's forearms tensed. He knew what was coming. "We are giving you command of the 7th Fleet," Venn continued. "Your mission is to eliminate the human threat. Completely. Permanently. Show us your loyalty to the Concordance, and your crimes will be forgiven." "And if I refuse?" Thex asked. "Then you will be executed as a traitor." Thex looked around the council chamber. Most of the councillors looked uncomfortable, ashamed even. But they were trapped by the system they had inherited. Admitting the full truth would mean admitting their entire civilization was built on evil. So instead, they were going to commit another genocide to cover up the first one. "I need time to prepare," Thex said finally. "You have 3 days," Venn replied. "After that, with or without you, the 7th Fleet launches." Thex left the council chamber and immediately contacted Valaxis. She was in hiding now, protected by citizens who believed her story. They met in a secret location. "They want me to kill the humans," Thex told her. "All of them. They're giving me the 7th Fleet and authority to use any means necessary." Valaxis's eyes widened. "Any means?" Including the Cascade weapon," Thex confirmed. "It's been banned for 8,000 years. It tears holes in reality itself. They want me to use it to erase the human fleet from existence." "That's madness," Silmar said. He had been monitoring communications from his mobile platform. "The Cascade weapon could destroy entire star systems. It could kill millions of Concordant citizens in the process." "They're desperate," Thex said. "The Concordance is fracturing. 20 species have already declared independence. Another 50 are considering it. The Council thinks if they can eliminate the humans quickly, they can restore order. Valaxis paced the small room. We need to contact Captain Chun. Warn her. I've been trying, Silmar said. The human fleet doesn't respond to any of our messages. They don't trust us. Why would they? Vex made his decision. Then I'll have to warn them in person. I'll take command of the 7th Fleet as ordered. But instead of attacking the humans, I'll defect. I'll bring them intelligence, ships, everything they need to defend themselves. That's treason, Valaxis said quietly. They'll execute you. They're already planning to commit genocide, Vex replied. What's my career compared to billions of lives? Over the next 3 days, Vex prepared his defection carefully. He selected officers he knew had doubts about the Council's orders. He quietly shared Valaxis' article with them, along with the raw data from the archives. Some refused to believe, but many others, like him, were horrified by what they learned. When the 7th Fleet launched, Vex had secured the loyalty of about 30% of his forces. It would have to be enough. Meanwhile, Valaxis managed to establish contact with the human fleet through an unexpected source. A young Kathrani engineer who had read her article managed to hack into one of the human communication channels. This is Valaxis, she said into the transmission, not knowing if anyone would hear. I'm the one who published the truth about what happened to your people. I know you have no reason to trust me, but the Concordance is planning to use a weapon called the Cascade device against your fleet. Commander Vex is bringing the 7th Fleet to warn you. Please, don't destroy his ships. He's trying to help. For 2 days, there was no response. Then, finally, a message came back. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Turan Reclamation Fleet. We received your warning. We verified Commander Vex's trajectory. Our forces won't fire on his ships. But understand this, Professor Valaxis. We're done being victims. We're done being forgotten. If the Concordance wants war, we'll give them war. The meeting happened in neutral space, far from any Concordance world. Vex's 30 ships faced the human fleet. Chun's vessels were ancient but well-maintained, their weapons clearly visible and armed. Vex transmitted his credentials and everything he knew about the Cascade weapon. Chen's ship, a massive vessel called the Remembrance, sent back coordinates for a direct meeting. Vex took a small shuttle to the Remembrance. When he stepped aboard, he saw humans for the first time in person. They were exactly as the myths described. Bipedal, bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes. But they were also so much more. They were real people with emotions and intelligence and dignity. Captain Chun met him in the ship's conference room. She was older than she had looked in the transmission, her dark skin lined with age and stress. But her eyes were sharp and clear. Commander Vex, she said. Or should I say, former commander. You've risked everything to warn us. Why? Because what the Concordance did to your people was evil, Vex said simply. And I won't be part of doing it again. Chun studied him for a long moment. Do you know how many of us survived the original genocide? 7 million. Out of 15 billion. We lived in ships designed to hold thousands, crammed with hundreds of thousands. We rationed air. We rationed water. We recycled everything, including our dead, just to survive another day. She stood and walked to a viewport showing the stars. We were born in those ships. We lived our entire lives in those ships. We died in those ships. Generation after generation for 12,000 years. Do you know what kept us going? Memory. We remembered Earth, Terra. We remembered our 12 worlds. We remembered every person who died. We told their stories to our children, who told them to their children, who told them to theirs. She turned back to Vex. We're not terrorists. We're not raiders. We're the ghosts of your past, come back to haunt you. And we want justice. What does justice look like to you? Dex asked. Chen's expression hardened. The council species who ordered the genocide must stand trial. The 12 worlds you stole must be returned to us. And the Concordance must publicly admit what it did. No more lies. No more cover-ups. Truth. And if the council refuses? Dex asked, though he already knew the answer. Then we burn it all down, Chen said coldly. We've spent 12,000 years preparing for this. We have the ships. We have the weapons. We have the will. And we have nothing left to lose. At that moment, alarms blared. A Concordance officer on Dex's flagship sent an urgent message. The council hadn't waited. They had sent another fleet, one loyal to them, with orders to activate the Cascade weapon. The weapon was already charging. In 1 hour, it would tear a hole in reality that would destroy the human fleet and everything else within 100 light years, including Concordance colonies, including innocent civilians. The council had decided that ending the human threat was worth any cost. Chun looked at Dex. I guess the Concordance gave us their answer. Not the whole Concordance. Dex said. Just the ones in power. Many species are horrified by what's happening, but they're too afraid to act. Then we'll make them act, Chun said. She turned to her crew. Prepare the fleet for battle, and get me a direct line to every Concordance world. It's time the galaxy sees what happens when you push humanity too far. As both fleets prepared for the battle that would decide the galaxy's future, Valaxis watched from her hiding place. She had started this by seeking truth. Now that truth was about to ignite a war that could destroy everything. But perhaps, she thought, some things needed to be destroyed before they could be rebuilt properly. The Cascade weapon hung in space like a dark star, surrounded by the Council's loyal fleet. It was an ancient device, built during the early days of the Concordance and banned after its first and only use had destroyed an entire star system. Now the Council was desperate enough to use it again. Captain Chun broadcast her message across every Concordance channel. Her face appeared on billions of screens across the galaxy. People of the Concordance, she began, her voice steady and clear. You know me as a terrorist, a raider, a threat to your peace. But I am none of those things. I am the descendant of survivors. My ancestors watched their worlds burn. They watched billions die, and they refused to let humanity be forgotten. She paused, letting her words sink in. Your council is about to use a weapon that will kill millions of your own people, just to silence us. They would rather murder innocents than admit the truth about how the Concordance was founded. They would rather commit another genocide than face justice for the first one. Chun's image changed to show the Cascade weapon charging, its energy readings visible to anyone with basic sensors. In 1 hour, that weapon will activate. It will destroy my fleet. It will also destroy 17 Concordance colonies in the blast radius. 7 million civilians. Your families. Your friends. Your children. The galaxy watched in horror as they realized she was telling the truth. The Council had placed the weapon in a populated region. They were willing to sacrifice their own people. We came back for justice, Chun continued. We came back to reclaim what was stolen from us. We came back to make sure humanity would never be forgotten again. But we didn't come back to slaughter innocents. We're not like the Concordance that murdered us. She looked directly into the camera. I'm giving you all a choice. Rise up. Demand the Council deactivate that weapon. Demand they face justice for their crimes. Or do nothing and watch your civilization destroy itself to hide its shame. The broadcast ended. For a moment, the galaxy held its breath. Then the protests began. Not just on one world, but hundreds, thousands. Species that had lived peacefully under the Concordance for millennia poured into the streets. demanding the council stop. They surrounded government buildings. They shut down transit systems. They made it clear they would not let their leaders commit another atrocity, but the council didn't listen. They were too deep into their lies, too committed to their cover-up. They gave the order to activate the Cascade weapon. That's when Dex made his move. His 30 ships, crewed by officers who had chosen truth over orders, attacked the council fleet. It was a desperate gambit. They were outnumbered 3-1. But Dex had surprise on his side, and something else. Human help. Chun's fleet emerged from the dark, not to attack the Concordance worlds, but to disable the Cascade weapon. Human ships moved with impossible precision, their ancient hulls proving tougher than modern vessels. They used tactics that the Concordance fleet couldn't counter because those tactics came from before the Concordance existed. The battle raged around the weapon. Ships exploded. Lives were lost. But Dex and Chun's combined forces fought with a single purpose: stop the weapon before it activated. A Concass, young human pilot named Marcus Chun. Sarah's great-grandson flew his fighter straight into the weapon's core. His ship was destroyed, but his sacrifice damaged the weapon's charging mechanism. The countdown stopped at 15 minutes, but the weapon wasn't disabled. The Council's forces were regrouping, and more loyal fleets were on their way. That's when something unexpected happened. 50 Concordant ships, ones that weren't part of Dex's defection, suddenly changed sides. Then 100 more. Then entire fleets. Officers and soldiers who had watched Chun's broadcast, who had read Valaxis's article, who had been horrified by what they learned, refused to follow orders. Admiral Kreth, a high-ranking Grell officer who commanded one of the Concordance's largest fleets, broadcast her own message. I will not fire on humans defending themselves from genocide. I will not kill innocent civilians to hide our leaders' crimes. I'm ordering my fleet to stand down. To all Concordance forces, examine your conscience. Choose what's right, not what's easy. The Council's fleet began to fracture. Some ships still followed orders, but many didn't. The battle devolved into chaos as concordant vessels fought each other, divided by loyalty and conscience. In the confusion, Chun led a strike team directly to the council chamber. Her soldiers, wearing armor that was 12,000 years old but still functional, breached the building where the galactic government sat. Councillor Ven and the other council members were evacuating when Chun caught up to them. She could have killed them all. Her soldiers had weapons trained on the very beings whose ancestors had ordered humanity's destruction. But Chun didn't fire. You're under arrest, she said simply. You will stand trial for genocide. You will answer for what your predecessors did and what you tried to do today. Ven looked at her with a mix of fear and confusion. Why not just kill us? After everything we've done to your people? Chun's expression was hard. Because we're not you. We don't believe in genocide. We believe in justice. As Chun's soldiers took the council into custody, Dex managed to disable the Cascade weapon permanently. The immediate crisis was over. But the real work was just beginning. The Concordance collapsed within days. Not in the war, but into reformation. Species that had been held together by lies and fear of extinction now had to rebuild on truth. Some species left to form their own governments. Others stayed, determined to create something better. A new council was formed, this time with human representatives. Captain Chun was offered a seat, but she declined. I'm a soldier, she said, not a politician. But I'll make sure humanity's voice is heard. Instead, it was Valaxis who took a seat on the new council. The former professor who had once proven humans were myths now, dedicated herself to making sure the truth was never buried again. She created the Department of Historical Reconciliation, tasked with uncovering and acknowledging all the Concordance's hidden crimes. Dax became Joint Commander of the reformed Concordance Defense Fleet, serving alongside Chen. Together, they rebuilt the military into something designed to protect, not oppress. The 12 dead worlds were returned to humanity. Teams of humans and volunteers from other species worked together to begin the long process of bringing them back to life. New Beijing, the first world to be bombarded 12,000 years ago, was chosen as the site for a memorial. The monument was massive, covering hundreds of square kilometers. It listed every name of every human who had died in the genocide. 15 billion names, carved in stone that would last for millions of years. At the center was a single flame that would burn forever, tended by volunteers from every species as a reminder of what hatred and fear could do. On the day of the memorial's dedication, billions watched across the galaxy. Chun stood at the podium, older now, wearing not armor but civilian clothes. She looked out at the crowd, humans who had been born in the dark between stars, finally standing on a world their ancestors had lost, and aliens from hundreds of species who had come to pay respects and acknowledge the truth. For 12,000 years we remembered, Chun said, her voice carrying across the field of names. We told our children stories of terror, of the 12 worlds, of what was taken from us. We kept humanity alive through memory when the concordance tried to erase us from existence. She touched the memorial wall, running her fingers over the carved names. But we didn't remember just for revenge. We remembered because forgetting would mean they died for nothing. We remembered because truth matters. We remembered because someone had to. Chun turned to face the cameras. Today, humanity is no longer a myth. We're no longer a legend. We're real. We're here. And we will never be forgotten again. She paused, then added something that surprised everyone. But we're not here to replace one empire with another. We're here to make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else. The new concordance will be built on truth, on justice, on the recognition that every species has the right to exist free from fear. Valaxis stood beside Chun and spoke next. I spent my career proving humans were myths. I was wrong. But more importantly, I was complicit in the lie that served genocide. Many of us were. We believed in the concordance because it was comfortable, because questioning it was hard, because the truth was buried so deep we could pretend it didn't exist. She looked out at the assembled crowd. Never again. That's our promise. Never again will we hide our crimes. Never again will we erase a species from history. Never again will we choose comfortable lies over difficult truths. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence. 15 billion seconds of silence, one for each person who had died. It took over 400 years to complete, maintained by volunteers and shifts, a living reminder that would span generations. As the first second of silence began, Chun stood with Dex and Valaxis, 3 people who had been enemies and became allies. Around them, the galaxy watched and remembered. Humanity had been erased from history once. It had taken 12,000 years, but they had returned. Not as conquerors, not as the monsters the concordance had feared, but as teachers. They taught the galaxy what it meant to endure, what it meant to remember, what it meant to demand justice without becoming the very evil you fought against. The myths had come back to life, and in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever. Chen looked up at the sky above New Beijing, seeing stars her ancestors had only dreamed of reaching. Somewhere out there in the dark between those stars were the ships that had carried humanity through its long exile. Some would be preserved as monuments. Others would be decommissioned and recycled. But humanity would never forget those ships. Never forget the dark years. Never forget the price they had paid for refusing to surrender. They were the species that was killed, erased, and refused to stay dead. They were proof that truth, like life itself, could never be permanently buried. And they were finally home.